our water supplies. And as a consequence, we don't kill off 170 babies per thousand like we used to. Now we only lose 6 or 7 babies per thousand. Every child that doesn't die in infancy lives to adulthood. You add 78 man-years to the average, it shifts the curve to the right. Of the increased life expectancy, 24 years of it's because of reduction in infant mortality. 7 is because of other variables, some of which could be medicine, but most of which are public health. So we used to have a lot of infectious disease, not so much now. This was mostly waterborne illnesses, improvements in public health. Now we have a lot more cancer and heart disease. So there's 109 billion people that have been born on the planet. 109 billion from the beginning of our presence. There's 7.3 billion alive today. We have well-documented evidence that 5 people have lived beyond 117. So if your plans are to live forever, you know your odds are about 1 in 20 billion right now of living beyond 117. So we're probably not going to live forever. That's probably a good idea. But what we can do is how much of the time that we're going to be alive will we be healthy versus will we be debilitated? Do you want to find yourself unable to talk or move, lying in a nursing home bed, waiting for somebody to come and change your diapers? Or do you want to live fully functional until you reach your genetic potential, go to bed one night and not wake up? That's really what we're talking about here. Not living forever, not living beyond your genetic potential, but living fully functionally as much as possible till you reach that unfortunate demise where one night you go to sleep and don't wake up again. Average person, though, does not do that. The average person spends 9.4 years debilitated and almost 17 years on average in poor health. So they're spending the last decade or 2 of their lives dependent on other people, debilitated, suffering, largely needlessly. That's the message. The message is that if we adopt aggressive, healthful living habits, we can dramatically reduce the likelihood of debility because you eliminate the risk factors for stroke and heart attack and delay the onset of cancer such that you avoid that. And it turns out, interestingly enough, if you look at the psychometric data, the last decades of life can actually be the most satisfying, the happiest, if people don't compromise their health. So they often are not, because in fact, that's one of the whole things about old age is it's, oh, I don't want to live too long because I don't want to be miserable and debilitated for 20 years, that kind of thing. Well, but that's really what we're talking about with healthy living habits. So the leading cause of death, heart disease, cancer, and stroke. But the actual causes of death are the use of tobacco, alcohol, and poor dietary choices. So when you think about leading causes of death, yeah, it's true, people are having heart attacks, cancer, and stroke, but why are they having those? Because of the actual causes of death, smoking, drinking, and choosing an animal-based, highly processed diet, maintaining obesity, and developing the diseases of dietary excess that used to be called, or like Dr. McDougall calls them, the diseases of kings, because it was only the wealthy elite kings that could develop those diseases. Now they're ubiquitous. Most of the factors, as far as determinants of percentage of mortality, are actually things that you can do something about. They're behavioral choices. Notice tobacco, number 1 on the list here, of ultimate cause of death. Why is tobacco so helpful? Why is tobacco so effective at killing people prematurely? It's because it can affect almost every organ system of the body. It's not just smoker's face that people get when they smoke. When you know what that premature wrinkling comes from, the premature age look from smoking, is because of collagen tissues cross-linkaging. It's free radicals causing cross-linkaging. It doesn't just affect the face, of course. It affects all the tissues in the body, including the animal lining of the blood vessels, which is why 80% of smokers will never get lung cancer. Isn't that interesting? 80% of smokers never get lung cancer because they die from heart disease before they live long enough to grow their tumors. So if you were an enterprising cigarette manufacturer, you could come up with a cigarette so toxic it killed everybody from heart disease and call it cancer safe. Number 2 on the list, blood pressure elevations. Blood pressure, unlike tobacco, mostly kills people through cardiovascular disease. It's mostly heart attacks and strokes. Alcohol consumption, number 3 on the list. Now, if you listen to the media, you'd think alcohol is some kind of health food. If you don't drink, you should start. You protect your heart, have red wine. And they say, oh, alcohol has resveratrol, and a powerful antioxidant, which is true. There's a little bit of resveratrol left from the skin of the grapes. It hasn't been completely destroyed in the processing of wine. And based on the fact there's this little trace of goodness that comes from the skin of grapes, they're trying to promote it as some kind of health food. You could eat grapes if you wanted to restore it. It's okay to do that, but you don't need to drink alcohol. Alcohol has, again, affects virtually every organ of the body. Think about what happens to people that drink alcohol. They get cirrhosis of the liver. Why? Because it's fatty scar tissue in the liver, because the liver is the detoxifying organ of the body, and alcohol is a hepatotoxic agent. Also, of course, it's got 7 calories per gram. The only thing more concentrated than alcohol is fat, pure fat. That's why men get those really attractive beer bellies, you know, and they get the plumber's crack. Yeah, chicks dig that. That's why they had to make the pants right up 2 inches higher to cover that plumber's crack, because they were going crazy. Okay, elevated cholesterol is a marker of animal food. It's a matter of how much dead, decaying flesh you eat, and milk and egg products. Being fat is a problem. They say love yourself the way you are and all that. Yeah, well, but you pay the price regardless. If you're overweight, you'll pay the price. You know, interesting, is it the fat that's the problem? Not exactly, because think about it. The moment a person changes to a plant-based SOS-free diet, their risk factors like drop like crazy. Their blood pressure normalizes. Things go, what's going on there? Is it the fat that's the problem, or the diet that makes you fat? Yeah, as soon as you change the diet, it takes a long time for the fat to go off completely. But your risk factors don't wait until the fat's off. They start going down right away. So you can dramatically drop your risk factors almost instantly, and then over time, those fuel stores will catch up. It's not the storing fat that's the problem. It is the diet that allows, the dietary excess that allows that. Just not eating enough fruits and vegetables is a major ultimate cause of death, according to the Center for Disease Control and Statistics. Okay. Physical inactivity, illicit drugs, and unsafe sex. So you notice these things that are the ultimate cause of death are not deficiency syndromes, not lack of protein in the diet. These are conditions of excess. That's why you see us spending so much time trying to educate people about how to avoid excess, ultimately the pleasure trap. So what everybody you know pretty much is going to be looking at this kind of metabolic syndrome. So they may have abdominal obesity or high cholesterol, lipids, elevated blood pressure, high blood sugars, insulin resistance. This is getting about 80% or so of the people that are dying prematurely. And we are getting fatter as a country. We know that in the United States, 1986, a couple years after I went into practice, there wasn't a single state in the United States that had more than 14% of the population having achieved obesity. That is 30 pounds overweight in a 5'4" frame. By 1997, though, you notice they needed another color here? Because over 20% of the population, that's the whole population state, achieved obesity. By 1999, obesity was spreading almost epidemic. This is only just a couple years. And then by 2001, here in the home of deep-fried ice cream, they managed to achieve 25% obesity saturation of the population. Not to be outdone, by 2004, and then sure enough, in 2005, another new color. These 3 states managed to go to 30% obesity. Now this is just a few years. Something's happening. We're going to talk about it. 2010, and then this is the proof, absolute proof that the Center for Disease Control, at least somebody at the Center for Disease Control, were optimists. And why do I say that? And you notice there isn't anybody yet that's achieved 35% obesity, but they put it on the graph, knowing at any moment somebody was going to have the big breakthrough. Through tremendous effort, they were going to achieve 35% obesity. And sure enough, there it is. Alabama, Mississippi, West Virginia, 35% obesity.
Is there anyone in the lowest category? In the least amount?
No.
Is there states?
No, we don't get there.
Because even California is in
No, California's 25%. Okay, so it's not just U.S. either, it's worldwide. Obesity now represents a bigger threat to health than deficiency, so more people dying as a consequence of dietary excess. But I'm proud to say, as an American, when it comes to increasing the strategic fat reserves in the waist and hips of Americans, we've done a better job than anybody else in the world. We're number 1. USA. USA. And now look at this, in this contest, this worldwide contest to see who can get the fattest and the sickest. Look at these people in Asia.
I know.
3% obesity. It's like they're not even trying. And along with this increasing epidemic of obesity is the diseases associated with, not the least of which is diabetes. We have an epidemic in this country of childhood diabetes right now. 400% increase in the number of children developing diabetes. And if you correlate diabetes and obesity, they follow almost 1-to-1. It's almost like there's a connection. So what we do about it as a country is we say we need to sell health food. So we tell people to drink olive oil and drink red wine and eat dark chocolate and coffee and energy drinks and granola bars and lots of animal products. Go on the dead Dr. Atkins diet or something. Of course, what we need is healthy foods. Health food and healthy foods have nothing to do with each other. Different issues. So even your health food stores often have very little health foods in the store. Most of it is health food, not healthy foods. Fresh fruits, vegetables, grains, legumes, beans, nuts, seeds, water. So, to understand, how is it possible that supposedly intelligent people have gone in just a generation from nobody having over 14% obesity to having this epidemic of obesity where 2/3 of people are now overweight or obese, which means if you're not fat, you're abnormal. You are abnormal if you are not overweight. How is it possible? We go back to the world of our ancient ancestors. Our ancestors evolved in an environment of scarcity. This was so difficult to get enough to eat. Remember that most humans that were ever born never reproduced. They never lived long enough to pass on their DNA, which means those losers were not your relatives. Your relatives were the winners, the few, the 5% that got enough to eat, didn't get eaten, and lived long enough to reproduce and pass their DNA on. That's your genetic heritage. Winners. Losers, whatever their characteristics are, we don't know, we don't care. But our ancestors, in this environment of scarcity, were perfectly designed to survive. They managed to do it. Not easily, but they managed to do it. They weren't the polite ones necessarily that said, oh, you first, dear. No, they pushed everybody else out of the way. They got theirs. Now, humans had some characteristics. One, we use tools. At least 1 million years. We know that humans, according to anthropologists, have been using tools in a sophisticated way at least 1 million years. We know that we used fire at least 500, I've seen some data saying as much as 800,000 years. Humans have been using fire to cook our food, to provide light, heat, and protection. And about 100,000 years ago, about the time that humans that we kind of think of ourselves as, the people that we would recognize as our immediate ancestors, appeared, language. We developed language. Sophisticated use of language turns out to be perhaps the most powerful tool the planet's ever seen. Because you could take information that used to take people a whole lifetime, you can pass it on in a few minutes just by listening to somebody speak later by reading their words. So this business of language turned out to be huge, and it was in part why we were able to survive. We had tools, we had fire, we had language, but even with all of these fabulously powerful tools, we didn't thrive. We barely survived as a species. For most of our history, there are 50,000 humans on the planet. There were times 70,000 years ago we almost bit the dust. Less than 10,000 humans survived, according to anthropologists. There was the big Indonesian volcano, and the weather got screwed up, and wasn't anything to eat. Most of the humans died off. But somehow, even though we managed to get down to around 10,000, we managed to survive. Tools, fire, language. It really wasn't until agriculture, which is really only 12,000, 15,000, relatively limited, that humans really began to thrive and population began to explode. Now think about this. This is an image of a modern human brain. This is a large bulbous neuronal net at the end of your spinal column, which all humans except certain politicians are purported to have. This is the image of a, they may have it, it's just not fully functional. Okay, so this is the ancient brain 100,000 years ago, is what they think a human brain would look like 100,000. You notice they're identical. In other words, in the last 100,000 years, the morphological characteristics of humans have not had a chance to change. That's not enough biological time for evolutionary pressures to change. So the last little tiny blip of biological time, about 100,000 years, there's purportedly been very little, if any, change in the human brain. You have the brain that you were designed for 100,000 years ago, in that environment of scarcity. That's your brain. You're perfectly set up for that environment. Now, if we go back farther, like 5 million or 3 million, or they're going to show brain size increasing up to about 100,000 years ago. This is not linear. This is geometric, this scale. So this time here represents, a blip compared to this time, right? This is 5 million years, 4,900,000 years. This is just 100,000 years. So the point is, the human body got bigger till about 2.4 million years ago. That's about as big as humans are today, more or less. And then the brain got to about where it was. This is where we show up. This is where Neanderthals and humans were both on the planet together, and we don't know exactly how, but Neanderthals bit the dust, we survived, okay? Maybe we killed them, maybe they died, who knows, whatever. Bottom line is, this is about where our immediate ancestors show up, and that's about the time our brain stops developing, which is really important to us for one reason. Your brain designed for an environment of scarcity. Think about it. If you took a human from today and you transport them back 100,000 years ago, they would be raised by those ancestors, just like if you brought a baby from 100,000 years ago to today and you raised it, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. A child from 100,000 years ago with the same brain capacity would be just as annoying when it's a kid, just as obnoxious when it's a teenager, would have just as many bad habits. You'd still become the most ignorant excuse for a human being on the planet when they hit teenage years. They still would wonder how it was you survived knowing so much about so little, you know? And your brain was designed for this environment of scarcity. You were designed to be able to get enough to eat, not get eaten, figure all that stuff out. You were not designed for the environment you live in today, where you can get enough to eat, not get eaten, and never get off the chair. You can sit on the couch, pretending to be part of somebody else's reality, right? Or you can engage in mock warfare, pretending you're part of the winning coalition by watching, we call it the NFL. Yeah. Now, that has profound consequences. When we say, how is it everybody got so fat since 1986, just in the last decade or two? What the heck's going on? How have we developed this epidemic of obesity? You need to first of all remember that we have a brain that's designed for this environment. We're living in this environment, and this environment includes some things like the use of processed foods. The way the brain directs the body is neurochemically. So for example, if you do something that favors your survival or your gene survival, that is reproduction, your brain rewards you. And it does it with a neurochemical, and that neurochemical is dopamine. So every time you engage in behaviors that favor survival and reproduction, you get a reward. And that reward is associated with a pleasure experience you know as pleasure. The more dopamine your brain squirts out, the more pleasurable whatever it is you're doing feels. So if you're eating, the more dopamine, the better it tastes. If you're having sexual behavior, if you're engaging in whatever it is, the more dopamine, the more you like it. So it's not surprising that the two behaviors humans needed, our ancestors needed to survive in the world of our ancient ancestors in the environment of scarcity was they had to get enough to eat, so they had to engage in feeding behavior, and they had to reproduce, so they had to engage in sexual behavior. So these are the two only concentrated natural stimulants of dopamine in the brain, food and sex. Food and sex, food, sex, food, sex, those are the things that stimulate dopamine unless you're a male human, in which case it's entirely different. It's sex and food. But whether it's food and sex or sex and food, we know that these are the normal natural stimulants of dopamine. And that works really well, because what would happen if feeding behavior wasn't reinforced? What if you might not eat enough? If you didn't get enough to eat, you wouldn't be the ones that live to reproduce, would you? And what if you didn't enjoy sexual behavior? Do you think you'd have enough sexual behavior to ensure babies? Think you'd do all that huffing and puffing and sweating if there wasn't some kind of reward? I don't think so. No. So what happens is the people that had this dopamine feedback for feeding behavior, sexual behavior, they managed to have enough babies, they managed to get enough to eat. The ones that didn't, they're long gone. Okay? Turns out there are ways besides food and sex to stimulate dopamine cascade. Human beings, the innovators we are, discovered there were certain chemicals, it just so happens that when you consume them, stimulate dopamine production in the brain. Alcohol's one of them. We drink because we like the way it makes it feel. The problem is it's an artificial stimulation of dopamine. And what happens with artificial stimulations of dopamine, if you continue to engage in that behavior, you can actually become physiologically addicted to that stimulation. And that's essentially the hallmark of addiction, where now you're drinking or taking drugs not just to feel good, but to avoid feeling bad. You get less and less pleasure from the feedback, you have to take more and more of the substance in order to be able to continue to bang on that circuitry. Eventually you become addicted, and now you can't stop it without feeling bad. And so alcohol is not the only example of this feedback mechanism. It turns out there's things like methamphetamines, there's materials you can inject in your vessels, there's this kind of stuff. What's this?
Coconut.
It's not coconut, it's not cheese, it's cocaine. Actually, cocaine is one of the most effective artificial stimulants of dopamine we've ever discovered. It works directly on the circuitry. In fact, what's interesting is if you take cocaine and smoke it and figure out how much dopamine is secreted and compare it to having an orgasm during sex, 10 times more dopamine smoking cocaine than having an orgasm.
Whoa.
You can imagine how reinforcing that is. Now, I was giving this talk in LA, an older woman, maybe 80, white hair. She stood up, she said, "Excuse me, Dr. Goldhamer, where do you get cocaine?" That's not the point. Now, if that was the end of the story, all we have to say is, okay, drugs are bad, just say no, don't use drugs. But it turns out there's other chemicals that can be, for example, put in the feed of animals that will artificially stimulate dopamine production in the brains of those animals. And so if you put those feed, for example, rats given ad libitum, they get as much to eat as they want, okay? Put these chemicals in their feed, they'll increase their weight 49% in 60 days. If you do it to birds, the birds will get so fat they can't fly. Okay, now is it because the mice and birds and everything they test, is it because of psychological? Did mommy not love this rat enough? Did daddy love this rat too much? Did they have stress? Or is it biological? Artificial stimulation, dopamine in the brain, rats systematically overeat, they get fat. Okay? Yeah, it's not psychological, it's biological. What's one of the chemicals that you can put in the feed of animals to make them fat?
Sugar.
C6H12O6, that's the chemical. You've seen it before. You know, what's interesting about sugar, we've increased consumption where people are consuming over 150 pounds a year. 150 pounds a year per person. AJ doesn't eat any. Somebody, who's eating her share? Huh? High fructose corn syrup, a heavily federally subsidized version of this. We've increased consumption 1,060%, introduced in 1984. 86, excuse me, 86. What else did we notice was increasing dramatically since the mid-1980s? Obesity. I'm sure there couldn't be any connection. 150 pounds a year. Went from 30 pounds to 150 pounds a year. You think it might make a difference?
Does that include high fructose corn syrup?
Yeah. 150 pounds of all your concentrated sweeteners. What's another chemical that you can add to the feed of animals or humans? This, you recognize this, right? C6H3, CH2, 7C8. That's oil, including olive oil. Doesn't matter. Oil is oil. 4,000 calories per pound, highly fractionated processed food. You take a cell, you rip it apart, you remove that one constituent component. It's got 9 calories per gram. And what's even worse is we take it, we cook it up at high temperatures, and we use it to soak, like a sponge, to soak grease up into things like potatoes. We call them French fries or potato chips. You should not eat those things. You should find instead the deep fryer and stick your head in and suck. That's what you're doing when you eat those fried foods. And it's affecting us, it's affecting our adults, it's affecting our children. And this generation of children is going to develop this epidemic cascading wave of disease and debility. And we're busy arguing about 1-payer, 2-payer, 6-payer systems. It is not going to matter what kind of system we put together if we don't do something about actually stemming the tide of dietary excess. 93% of all of the calories consumed by everybody you know, on average, comes from either animal food, meat, fish, fatties, or dairy products, or pleasure trap chemicals. That means 7% of calories are now whole foods, but of that, 1/3 of it's potatoes, mostly served as French fries or potato chips. So fruits and vegetables no longer make a statistically significant percentage of the diet of people living in industrialized countries. They are the decoration on the plate. We know why everybody's fat and sick and getting fatter and sicker. It's because they're eating chemicals that fool their brain, and they are addicts. It is addiction by any definition. We have problems cutting back, we go through withdrawal, we go into denial, all the things you're going to see, the hallmark addiction. It may not be quite as potent per volume as cocaine, but it's the same neurochemical cascade. It's called pleasure trap. If you have not read our book, you should. Okay? It takes you about 4 hours. It's not going to tell you what you want to hear, but it does tell you what you need to know. To understand why it's going to be so difficult to go back in a world designed to make you fat and sick and miserable and try to overcome those evil forces. It will be most likely the most difficult thing you ever do in your life. So, we're going to talk about high blood pressure. High blood pressure leading contributing cause of death and disability. As I said, the majority of people, by the time, if they live to 65, the majority of people will have high blood pressure. If you're not hypertensive, by the time you're 65, you're abnormal. How long will your doctor tell you, once you diagnose as high blood pressure, that you must take the 1 to 5 medications that they'll give you, whether it's diuretics or beta blockers, calcium channel antagonists? Do you take them for a week? A month? Oh, you're going to take them for the rest of your life. And how does your doctor know that you're going to have to be on drugs forever? Because he's telling you, or she's telling you, that if you'll do what you're told, you'll never get well. You'll be sick the rest of your life. You will die either from your disease or the treatment of your disease. But you will never, ever get well. What if you have diabetes? How long do you have to be on drugs? Forever. What about rheumatoid arthritis, ulcerative colitis, ankylosing spondylitis, asthma, eczema, psoriasis? You never get well because there's no pretense of you getting well. The top number when you measure blood pressure, the systolic blood pressure, it represents the pressure of your blood in the vessels when the heart contracts, and the bottom number represents the pressure in the blood when your heart's in its relaxed mode. So every time your heart beats, it pushes the blood out. It does it at a certain pressure. That is a very sensitive indicator of what's called all-cause mortality. That is death from any cause, not just heart attacks and strokes. Because it measures so many different organ systems. When your pressure goes up, you don't know, is it because you plug up your blood vessels with fat? Do you have kidney disease? You've got some tumor blocking something. You don't know what it is, you just know the pressure's up. When the pressure comes down, whatever the rate limiting factor had to be reversed, or your pressure would still be up. So that's why when you look at high blood pressure and the conditions related to it, like for example, congestive heart failure. When the heart muscle loses integrity and you can't beat properly, you start swelling up. Like if you have congestive heart failure and you lay down, your lungs will fill up with fluid. You could drown in your own fluids. That's why they have to sleep sitting up. That's caused by high blood pressure. That's the major contributing factor for congestive heart failure. Strokes. People have brain attacks. They lose the ability to motor function, or they die, whatever. High blood pressure. Without high blood pressure, incidence of stroke becomes just super rare. Okay? High blood pressure, killing people, represents every organ system. Most people develop 38 million offices. This is big bucks, billions of dollars of money. This is why people go to doctors and take drugs. It's a leading justification for prescription medication. But the majority of people that are going to die from a heart attack or stroke do not have blood pressure high enough to justify medication. When I say that, is if you can't just give everybody blood pressure. For example, at 138 over 88, if you take blood pressure medications, assuming you don't have end organ target disease, your risk of dying from the medication is higher than dying from a heart attack, even though you have 5 times the risk of dying from a heart attack. Because the medications have problems. It's not just chronic cough, fatigue, and impotence, it's also death. That's why they don't give you blood pressure medication unless your blood pressure rises to a certain level, the level at which the death rate from the drugs is exceeded by the background death rate from hypertension. So that's why you don't just put it in the public water supply and give it to everybody. Since 2/3 of people have it, you think that that would be a solution. Now, reducing your blood pressure through diet and lifestyle change reduces your risk of dying from any cause. 1 point for every point your systolic blood pressure comes down, all the way down to 90 over 60. So even if your blood pressure is 120, if you exercise, you lose weight, and you draw your blood pressure to a more optimum level, say 90, you reduce your risk of dying of any cause 30%. More importantly, you reduce your risk of dying from the things, or becoming debilitated from the things that most people fear. The heart attacks, the strokes, the things that make you a mess. How effective are natural therapies in treating high blood pressure? If your blood pressure is 220 over 120, do you think a chiropractic adjustment or an osteopathic adjustment will normalize your blood pressure? Probably not. What about homeopathy? Taking a substance reduced to the point that it doesn't exist. Do you think that'll normalize? Do any homeopaths think, oh, we'll treat your high blood pressure by giving you a homeopathy remedy? No, they don't do that. What about nutritional supplements, vitamins, minerals? You can normalize blood pressure. Anybody you know normalize their blood pressure by taking a vitamin pill from 220 over 120? What about psychotherapy? We're going to talk and blame mommy and whatever it is we do. I always say that just to bug Dr. Lyle. I know they don't really do that, but the point is, cognitive behavioral therapy, as effective as it is for anything, not going to normalize blood pressure. There's no reputable therapist that thinks, oh, you just do the therapy and everything will be fine. Massage, bodywork, acupuncture, as useful as they may be, are not going to normalize malignant hypertension, or diabetes, or rheumatoid arthritis, or ulcerative colitis, or ankylosing spondylitis, or asthma, eczema, or any of the other conditions that we treat here. When you have really serious illness, you have to pull out the big guns. What are the big guns when it comes to medicine? No, it's diet, sleep, exercise, and if necessary, fasting. Those are the only things that work at actually dealing with the underlying causes of the problem. Weight loss works. We know for every kilogram of weight you lose, there's a 1.6 drop in blood pressure. We know that a vegetarian high-fiber diet, independent of weight loss, just eating enough plant foods tends to reduce blood pressure. We know that alcohol reduction, getting rid of that nasty toxic waste, major impact on blood pressure. In fact, the only thing next on the list there is exercise. Exercise also, walking, hiking, biking, helps normalize blood pressure. Drugs do work. They do lower blood pressure, an average of about 12 points, but they do so at risk of chronic cough, fatigue, impotence, and death. Sodium restriction, if you aggressively restrict sodium, if you make sure you're not eating more than 1 milligram of sodium per calorie of food, if you look at a label, God forbid you're buying, I have a simple label reading course. If it's got a label, you don't want it. But if you do buy something with a label, you look at the sodium concentration, you look at the calories per serving. If there's more than 1 milligram of sodium per calorie, that's not for you. Combining it, John McDougall at St. Helena Hospital combined all this, and he was able to drop 17 points. T. Colin Campbell from Cornell University, author of the China study, came here, treated with us. He had developed some dioxin poisoning. He was the first scientist to isolate dioxin and developed some problems from that, came here, did some fasting, got well, got involved in our research. And he helped us publish a paper that had an average drop of 37 points, stage 3 hypertension, in 174 consecutive patients that we treated. Of the 174 people were able to lower their blood pressure enough to eliminate medication. We have the largest effects that have ever been shown in treating high blood pressure in human beings. We had an average drop of 60 points in stage 3 hypertension. So people came in with the highest levels of hypertension, like 180 or above, dropped their blood pressure on an average of 60 points, plus the fact they started on meds, they ended off meds, so whatever effect medications have would be in addition to the 60 points. Major effect size, and with Dr. Campbell's help, we were able to get that as our first published paper. That was even before we had formed the TrueNorth Health Foundation, our current 501c3 nonprofit foundation we'll talk about later. We also published a second paper. This is medically supervised fasting in the treatment of borderline hypertension. These are people that have elevated blood pressure that's killing them, but it's not high enough to justify the risks of drugs. And of course, they respond equally as well. We were approached by the International Union of Operating Engineers. This is over a decade ago. This is the guys that build the highways, crane operators. And we were invited to make our program a fully covered medical benefit. And we did, and we started treating union guys, and we did a study. We took 30 consecutive union members, and they dropped their pressure an average 26 points and 30 points respectively. And on follow-up at 1 year, they were still down appropriately, and they saved more money in that first year than the entire cost of the program. So this went on for over a decade. We were treating these union guys with fasting and a plant-based diet. What the union did is they said anybody that has high blood pressure, diabetes can go to this program, do whatever they tell you to do, and we'll pay for it. So it was a good deal. The very first person they ever sent to us, though, they had just made this program a covered benefit, but they didn't tell them what the program was. So the very first guy they sent in, Scott, this guy's got a big keg on his belly, he's hypertensive, 220 over 120, diabetic, all kinds of medications. He kind of comes on campus, and he's looking around, and he says, oh, I think I'm in the wrong place. I said, no, you're on my list, you're in the right place. He says, no, I think I'm in the wrong place. I said, no, you're here to get well. He goes, no, I'm not sick. I said, I just got a little hypertension, but I said, well, you are sick, and you're so sick, in fact, that it's eventually going to kill you. And he said, well, aren't we all going to have to die? I said, yeah, we all have to die, but I said, you're spending almost $800 a month on medications to get you healthy. You may not have to take those medications. And he says, what do I care? The union pays for my medication. And it was at that point I realized this was not my normal self-selected, highly conscientious, motivated patient. And I don't know what to do about him. I'm thinking, what happens to males, particularly when they have diabetes and hypertension, take all those drugs? And I thought, oh. So I said, hey, if we teach you off all those drugs, there's a chance we can do something about your little problem. So he starts to stand up, he says, well, why the hell didn't you just say so? So we're thinking, he's telling me about his diet, and this is his diet, except not without that disgusting green stuff. He would take that off if he forgot to put that on there. He'd lift the bun off and get rid of that. So we thought, okay, we're gonna feed him a little bit before we try to start the fast. We give him some of this food, and he's trying to eat the food, but he's like, and I'm thinking, oh my God, maybe he's got a tumor or something. He said, it looks like you're having trouble with the food. He goes, what food? He says, this stuff is not food. He said, this stuff is disgusting. He said, if I have to eat tasteless swill like this the rest of my life, I'd rather just die. I said, why don't you just go out to my truck, get my 12 gauge. When I'm not looking, you just shoot me in the head. So we checked him in. He fasted 26 days, during which time he lost about 50 pounds. Normalized his blood pressure, blood sugar levels. Afterwards, we're feeding him the same food, but now he's actually eating the food. And I said, it looks like you're doing better with the food. He said, yeah, your damn chef's finally getting the hang of it. 20 minutes to convince him it was the same stuff we were doing. No, he says, that stuff you gave me when I came in was disgusting. This stuff is not bad. So we were approached by we signed this contract, we started admitting these people. Medical board got wind of it. California Board of Medical Quality Assurance, represented by the Attorney General of the state of California, decided that recommending fasting was a bad thing. And so they went through a process to shut us down. They determined recommending fasting constituted such a gross violation of the standard of medical practice that it rose to the level of criminal negligence. So I had to get a criminal defense attorney to represent me against the Attorney General's office of the state of California. I was the first person in my family to need the services of a criminal defense attorney, and my father was so proud. Maybe that. Yeah. Fortunately, we won that, so we're still here, so it worked out okay. And what we're talking about, you heard from my wife, Dr. Morano, about intermittent fasting. This idea of narrowing the feeding window, eating dinner earlier, having a longer period of fasting till breakfast, maybe a day or two a week where you reduce to raw fruits and vegetables only 600 calories. Different ways of manipulating your feeding program to reduce your total intake. That's all good. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is complete fasting. Some of you, have done that here. Some of you up to 40 days. Moses, David, Elijah, Jesus, some of the people here, you're in good company. Water-only fasting is a bizarre and rather intense process, but can be very helpful. 70 kilogram males, 150 kilogram male can fast about 70 days. Women, owing to their high percent body fat, longer. So not that you would necessarily want to do that. We don't go over 40 days usually, but the point is people can go a long time. And fasting turns out to be a biological adaptation. If it wasn't for fasting, our species couldn't have survived. It was absolutely critical to the human's ability to survive. And the reason was, once humans wandered away from the tropics and a ready supply of food, what happens if spring came late? You die. You have this ridiculously large brain that is your main burner of glucose. You cannot go, much like chimps can't go, more than about a week without a fuel source. If you just kept burning glucose, like for example, chimpanzees never wandered away from the tropics. Why? They can't. Anytime they wandered away, as soon as spring came late, they all died. They have to have a continuous source of food. Humans, because of our ability to fast, in other words, the ones that wandered away, that didn't have this ability, they all died. The only humans that ever survived wandering away from the tropics were the ones that had the ability to change from burning glucose to burning fat. A critical biological adaptation, which is also why fasting turns out to be a safe and effective intervention, because you can do it, because you're designed to be able to do it. 4 phases of fasting. Everybody goes through the gastrointestinal phase. You eat food, you burn up the food in your gut. What happens once you've burned up the food in the gut? You either eat again or you begin to mobilize reserves from someplace. Glycogen lysis lasts for a day or two. If you run a marathon, about 20 miles in, you'll run into the wall. That's depleting your glycogen stores. Then you have to, through enzymatic induction, go through gluconeogenesis or lipolysis, mobilizing fat or protein stores. After about 72 hours or so, you enter into ketosis, where your brain changes from burning sugar to burning fat. That's essentially what's going on. That's what's unique about humans. Not all animals can do it. In fact, most animals can't do this. Only a few animals can do this. We had to be able to do it because our brain was so big and we wanted to wander away from a ready source of food supplies. So basically, fasting is about how to draw on your fats, store your protein, and conserve your nutrient resources. If you're too active in fasting, you'll burn more calories, but you burn more protein. That's why we incarcerate people on the campus. We don't let you run around and do stuff when you're fasting, because you then end up burning a lot more protein, and we don't want you burning protein. Now, would you feel okay? Yeah. In fact, you might even feel better if we let you be more active. But we don't care if you feel well. We care if you get well. Okay, so that's why we do a lot of these things to you that don't seem like it would be as comfortable as if you just let you do what you want. Don't want to mess with our outcome data. Okay, indications for fasting. Loss of appetite that characterize acute disease. Acute chronic illness, we use it to speed healing, to change behaviors. For example, smokers. By the end of the anybody quitting smoking here? Fasting? how long did it take when you went on your fast before the cravings and stuff for cigarette disappeared? Do you remember?
Pretty much within a day.
Day or two. Now, some people say, yeah, you're so miserable fasting, you don't think about the cigarettes, but it's not actually true. The metabolic process is clear. Most people report within 2 days. Once in a while, it'll go to 72 hours, but almost everybody, once they quit, and it happens with cocaine, it happens with alcohol, and it even happens with food, although it takes a little longer with food than it does with drugs. You know, if you do a low-sodium diet, it takes almost a month to adapt to low-sodium diet. So for a month, the food tastes like crap, tasteless swell. But with fasting, it happens a little quicker. With fat, it can take as much as 3 months to neuroadapt where you feel satiated on a low-fat diet. For 3 months, and particularly if you're losing weight, and particularly if you're a female losing weight, your brain is saying, hey, you're hemorrhaging strategic fat stores. Your brain doesn't care how fat you are. The fatter, the better. You'll survive when all them skinny bitches won't make it. Spring comes late, you think them skinny ones are going to last very long? No, no, no. Get stuck on the boat or something? No, you want to be fat. Your brain worked hard to put those fat stores on. It doesn't want to give those fat stores up. You start hemorrhaging strategic fat stores, your brain's going to trigger you with neurochemistry and get you to go get some, and no more salad. Put that stuff as 100 calories a pound. We're not going anywhere with that. You go get some peanut brittle or ice cream or some granola or something. Put some butter boat on it or something. Patient selection. Okay, one of the things we do here is we specialize with a certain type of patient, ones that we think are going to have good results. That's what we want to work with, people that have good results. It turns out if you put people through hell and they have a good result, they forgive you. If they don't have a good result, it doesn't matter what you do. So we want to try to work with people that have good results. So they have conditions and attitudes and backgrounds sufficient that they'll thrive and do well here. That's why if you look at our, quote, promotional material, it's not exactly promotional. I mean, we have like our informed consents online. You know, it says, you know, you're crazy if you do this, no papers or you'll probably die. You know, I mean, that's essentially what it said. Because we're not looking to try to misrepresent the fact that fasting can be an intense and miserable experience. But if you survive it, you'll probably forgive us. The experience of fasting. Foul taste, it coats the mouth. Anybody experience that? Faster's mouth? Yeah, that's great, isn't it? And increased body odor, sometimes so much you don't even want to be in the same room with yourself. Fatigue, sleep disturbance, oh yeah. No, hard to sleep. Restless, you want irritability? 60 people here, like you don't all know that now because we got the population diluted down with like normal people right now, but like January 2nd, when everybody's fasting, you get 50, 60 people taking with their coffee, cigarettes, and food. Oh. So entertaining. Dizziness, aches and pains, low back ache of fasting, and you can get nausea and vomit, all that green, yellow bile sometimes works its way out, diarrhea, vomiting. You can have rashes and discharges. Oh my gosh, all kinds of stuff coming out of mucous membranes. Heightened senses where you can smell, taste, hear, everything's all like super sensitive. And the healing crisis where you're pretty sure you're going to die. Chronic problems with acute. You know, it's true that some people, if you don't know about fasting, you haven't been through this, this may not sound that attractive. And I learned that early on in my career. We had a local medical doctor who referred one of his patients, lifelong patient, to this doctor. And she came in and she had autoimmune disease, she had rheumatoid arthritis, she had high blood pressure, a lot of medications, a lot of pain, older woman. And her doctor, she trusted implicitly. She said she'd known this doctor since he was a little boy, whatever that means. And he was probably like 30 or something. So, but she said he was such a kidder that he said we could help her, but he said the way we were going to help her was put her in a room and not feed her for 2 weeks. She thought it was so funny. I told her it would be at least 3. And she said, what do you mean? I said, well, we call it fasting. And she goes, well, but what would happen to me if I did nothing but drink water for 3 weeks? I said, well, your mouth will taste like something crawled in there and died, and you'll smell really bad, and you'll have irritability and restlessness, nausea, aches, pains, rashes, discharges, and probably think you're going to die. And then she said, well, my, you're quite the salesman, aren't you? Where do I sign up? So she fasts 26 days. She goes through the thing, does well. Obviously, I'm telling you the story. Wouldn't be a good story if she died. So she gets through the process. We get her off the drugs. We send her back to Dr. Anderson in Clear Lake. And he sees her when she comes in the office, and he immediately calls me on the phone. He says, I can't believe what I'm looking at. He said, in 25 years of practice, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. He says, the thing I don't understand is she said you fasted her on water only for 26 days. How did you get her to do it? And I said, well, Scott, she was so reluctant, we finally realized the only hope was to tie her up. I said, you did not. And he turned to her and he said, did they tie you up? And she says, oh no, not till after the second week. He quit his job, he joined our staff because he said he wanted to spend the last couple of years of his practice life doing something worthwhile. Fasting duration goes from a few weeks to many weeks, and sometimes it's many fasts, and unfortunately we don't know yet how long, how frequent to do it. In other words, we don't know if it's going to be one fast or multiple. We don't know if it's a short or a long. We guess a little bit. The reason is we don't have non-reliable diagnostic markers. That's going to change because we are now, literally, as we start this new year, doing some work through our nonprofit foundation, the TrueNorth Health Foundation. We have put a team together. We've got Tasha Myers here. Who's our PhD postdoc researcher. We've added David Goldman. We've added Dr. Ben Kim to our other staff. These people all have research experience. Sonia, our newest intern resident. And with the help of our foundation and the grants we've received, we've been able to hire some people. We have a relationship now with the Buck Institute right here in Nevada, one of the world's leading anti-aging research facilities, and Washington University, one of the top research facilities in the world, and a gentleman there, an MD, PhD named Luigi Fontana, has been doing some human subject research in fasting. What the Buck and Luigi know is that the only thing that really seems to work at dramatically prolonging life expectancy, reducing cancer, reversing some of these processes is actually been in research that's been doing in fasting, mostly in animals, now a little bit in humans. But we've become the human subjects laboratory for Washington University, Luigi Fontana, and the Buck Institute. So we'll be admitting subjects here. We'll be collecting the samples. They'll be analyzing those in different labs throughout the world, looking at what's happening before, during, and after fasting. For example, we can now measure in lymphocytes, they can measure the number of mutations. And the quantitative mutation count correlates well with not only cancer, but also aging itself. And we're going to be looking at hopefully seeing reversal of those processes. We can measure autophagy, the active ability of white blood cells to eat up cancer cells and bacteria and debris. So a fundamental part of your immune system, you can actually measure how efficient it is now. We're going to be able to measure that before, during, and after fasting, and in conjunction with these dietary changes. We have a contract we just negotiated with the Oncoblock people, the people that do the ENX2 marker. They can now detect one of 26 types of cancer at the point much, much earlier than you could before. Before you can find it on mammograms, before you can find it in colonoscopy. The hope being if we can detect it very early and very reliably, it's 99% sensitive, 99% specific, that at that point it may still be vulnerable to reversal. And if we can show that it does reverse, of course, all bets are off. There's going to be a big upheaval. And that company feels good enough about fasting that they've been willing to fund some stuff that we're going to be doing with them on a pilot study. So we're very excited about that. We have, anyway, let me go into this. Fasting duration, so the point is we don't know yet, but we will, because we're going to develop these non-invasive diagnostic markers. We can do a blood test and say, okay, this is the person that needs to fast. This is how long they need to fast. Then we can document it and shove our success in the faces of the people that think the diet, fasting, and lifestyle don't matter, or that they think it's criminal negligence behavior. It'll be so fun. And it's going to really piss me off. Fasting mechanism. How is it possible that doing nothing can be more effective at treating these leading contributing causes of death and disability than doing anything? How many people that fast lose weight? What percentage? That sounds quacky, doesn't it? But the laws of physics and thermodynamics tell you if you don't eat, you're going to lose weight. And weight loss averages about a pound a day. Natriuresis, everybody that fasts natriuresis, they selectively eliminate the sodium. When you get the excess sodium out, the blood volume goes down. So now the blood pressure comes down, the non-healing wounds heal up, the congestive heart failure begins to ease, everything begins to decongest. Detoxification was the traditional justification of fasting. Why did people fast? Because the idea was that you had toxins in your body. But do you really have toxins in your body? Are there literally hundreds of chemicals that have been quantified you find in virtually every human being in various concentrations? Yes. PCB, dioxin, heavy metals, mercury. These things build up in the tissues of the body. And over time, they can eventually interfere on a cellular level with cellular production. And this is one of the things they think is contributing to both cancer and premature aging, Alzheimer's, etc. So the idea in fasting, the body mobilizes these materials, processes and lipids, and drops total body load. How do we know that? They've done fat biopsies before and after fasting. They see that the levels go up really high in fasting, and they'll actually total body levels drop after fasting. PCB, dioxin studies, others. We're going to be able to do some more of this. Autophagy is, as I mentioned, the ability of the cells to eat up the debris that's not there. It's dramatically enhanced during fasting. We know this now. In animal studies, we believe it's going to be true in humans as well. So, in fact, some people criticize fasting. There are doctors out there that say fasting is so efficient at mobilizing toxins, you should never do it. Because your body doesn't know what it's doing, even with 1 billion years of evolution. It doesn't know how to regulate things, and so you're going to poison your organs and destroy yourself because you detoxify too quickly. Unless you buy their proprietary products.
Oh.
Buy their Ultra Clear, and then everything's fine. But no, of course, it's nonsense. Hematopoietic stem cells, you hear about stem cells, that's in the news now. They're going to shoot stem cells in and grow into new cells and everything. It's great in theory, not in practice. It's not like it's very limited application right now. But the sensitivity of multipotential hematopoietic stem cells is one of the reasons why cancer therapy it doesn't work very well. Cancer therapy was supposed to work great because what you do is you have some cancer cells have higher metabolic rates, so more susceptible to radiation or chemotherapy. So the idea is we'll give you some poison, and the cancer cells will die more than the healthy cells, and everything will be great. You kill off every cancer cell. The problem is to get rid of cancer, you have to kill every cell. And if you give enough poison to kill every cell, you also kill the host. That's the problem. So the problem is trying to play around, get the drug that's poison enough to kill just that cancer cell, but not kill the host. And they mess around and mess around and mess around, and then it grows back. Not very satisfying. Except in some very rare types of cancer, most like the breast, lung, prostate, it doesn't work that well. So what Victor Volter-Longo at USC did is he took 30 rats with cancer, gave them enough chemotherapy, they killed all the cancer cells, and all the rats died. Didn't work so well. Took the same rats, the same cancer, he fasted the rats, did the same exact treatment, all 30 rats survived. And dramatically enhanced cancer-free survival. Because it turns out that fasting is a really poor environment for cancer cells. They're much more vulnerable to the stresses of a fasting environment than healthy cells are. Healthy cells, remember, are biologically adapted to fasting. Cancer cells, with their higher metabolic rates, don't like that environment. So they're more vulnerable to chemotherapy in the fasting state than the fed state. And healthy cells, it turns out, and there's Dr. Myers can explain to you this, how this works, there's a whole glutathione cascade, are protected from the effects of radiation under the fasting state. And so what they've been doing now, certainly in rats, but they're starting to do in people, is they'll do short-term fasting in conjunction with chemotherapy and dramatically improve the outcomes. So then people say, well, wait a second, what is it that fasting is doing that's protecting the healthy cells and making the cancer cells vulnerable? And they're funding research, millions of dollars of research, some of which we're going to be the benefactors of, because what do the drug companies want to know? They want to know what's the mechanism so they can come up with a fasting mimic drug. So they can give you a drug that will do to you what fasting does, but without you having to fast, and that they can sell. And so we're going to be the benefactor of that research because they're not interested in having people fast. They're interested in finding out how is it that fasting is working. And so that's what some of the research at the Buck is looking at, trying to identify the mechanism. Now we're going to use it to identify non-invasive diagnostic markers, prove we're right and they're wrong. In fact, that's what Dr. Lau says our next book is going to be titled, We Were Right. Recent research shows that, this is according to Volter-Longo, and this was in Journal of Metabolism 2015, for those of you like in big impact medical journals. Recent research shows prolonged fasting can rejuvenate old hematopoietic stem cells, actually allow the old stem cells to rejuvenate and protect healthy hematopoietic stem cells from toxic effects of chemotherapy. Prolonged fasting represents a profound way to reverse aging of the immune system and enhance cancer treatment, according to Volter-Longo, USC. Now this guy, we talked about differential stress resistance and differential stress sensitization. This just means that cancer cells are more vulnerable and healthy cells are protected. Combination of fasting and chemotherapy results dramatically higher cancer-free survival than chemotherapy alone. Now it turns out if you just do the fasting, you also have a profound effect on these biomarkers, but he's of course not publishing that because that's not what the research is about. Research is about how to enhance drug treatment. It turns out that fasting affects the mitochondria, the little energy mechanisms in the cell. It says that fasting provides antioxidant and rejuvenative benefits to the mitochondria, results in efficient ATP production, enhancing antiviral immunity. So some of these chronic viral infections, the biofilm type infections that don't go away with antibiotics or other things, do seem to be responsive to fasting. If we have time later, I'll show you a slide. We had Fry Labs sent up a patient with lupus that had very high titers of what's called human protozoa rheumatica, which is a viral infection of the blood. It's a protozoan infection, not a viral, excuse me, protozoan infection of the blood. There's no antibiotics that are effective against it because the protozoan coats itself with a polysaccharide coating, which makes it kind of has a protection against antibiotics. So they thought, well, if we fast them, because they noticed that the titers of the lupus patients improved when they were fasting, or when they went on a vegetarian diet. So they said, if we fast the person long term, then we tried different antibiotics, maybe we could find an antibiotic that would wipe out the protozoan infection and resolve the lupus, where they're also find this with cancer, certain types of cancer. So we brought the patient in at really high titers, fasted him for 12 days, then retested, hoping that we would see a reduction in the titer so they could try different drugs. What we found was it was completely resolved. There was no more trace of the organism. And were they excited and happy? No, they said, oh darn, we fasted too long. We need to try it next time only 6 days. Because if there's nothing left to treat, there's no thing to treat.
Oh, come on.
Oh no, come on. There's nothing, the whole point was, if there's not a treatment, nobody's going to buy their patented test. Because what are you going to tell people to fast? That would be ridiculous. So that next time they want to do a shorter one, still have some titer left and see if they can find something to actually treat. Fasting in lower eukaryotes, we know that fasting extends longevity by reprogramming metabolic and stress resistance. In rodents, we know that it protects against diabetes, cancer, heart disease, neurodegeneration. That is like Alzheimer's development. We know that in animal studies. We know in humans that it reduces obesity, treats high blood pressure, asthma, and RA. Now, where did they decide that it treats high blood pressure? That's right, our studies with T. Colin Campbell, published in Journal 2015, cited by Walter Longo. Now, I evaluate another scientist's intelligence based on how much they agree with me.
Then you
So
must
he's a genius, because he's citing our research in Journal Thomas. So that was good. It delays aging by protecting against disease of dietary excess. So what we're saying is, in animal studies, you're actually getting kind of a rejuvenescence effect, and we're hoping that we're going to find markers that will support that in humans as well. Why haven't they done this in humans before? We're actually the first facility that's gotten human subjects approval to do long-term water-only fasting in humans, because they felt that too many people would die. It would be too dangerous. The mortality would be too high of not eating for a week or two, because they don't know that much about fasting apparently. So now the other thing I would say is, we still ran, it took me 2 years to get through a human subject committee, even at a naturopathic medical school, where you think they'd be supportive, since it's a basis of naturopathic medicine is fasting. So what we did is, with Dr. Meyer's help, we formed an internal review board and a human subjects committee, and we managed to go through all the paperwork and hoop jumping and legal stuff, and we just recently got our federal-wide assurance. So we're now a federally chartered human subjects committee. We can approve not only our own studies, but other researcher studies through our nonprofit foundation. So that's a huge nightmare roadblock. But now we actually have a committee that meets 4 times a year. They can review the studies, make sure all human subjects are taken care of, and basically get the things rolling, which before it was this big institutional nightmare. But again, those things you don't think about, but just the amount of hours of time to get through and get the things and fill it up. Okay. So the very first case report that Dr. Myers helped us work on was this woman, a 42-year-old female diagnosed with follicular lymphoma. This is lymph cancer, stage 3, upper and lower part of her extremities. Been tracked for 2 years in our local medical school, continued to progress. She had CT-guided biopsy. They did, CT-guided biopsy, confirmed the diagnosis, tracked the problem, no question about her workup. Flow cytometry showed positive mono B cells up to 15% of the specimen. All the parameters met. These are the sizes of the tumors. So she went to her primary doctor because she was getting so ill that she couldn't really function well anymore. And he said, look, it's time to start the chemotherapy radiation. The reason they don't jump on it right away is because it doesn't work. And so they try not to do the treatment until the last ditch thing, because it makes people so miserable. They want to give them at least the last bit of quality of life. But he said, now it's time to let's try the chemotherapy radiation. And she said, well, could I try dietary change? The reason she asked is she had known somebody that had come here and with rheumatoid arthritis and was told nothing could be done and got well. And they said, no, diet has nothing to do with follicular lymphoma. And she said, what about fasting? And her doctor told her essentially that we were criminal quacks to recommend that, defer her from necessary treatment and all that. Okay, so she goes to the oncologist at the med school and also tells her, look, it's time for chemotherapy radiation, diet's not going to help. And he said, fasting's not going to do anything, but if it would make you feel better and you want to do something, just don't wait too long, whatever. So given that tremendous physical support, emotional support. She came up here, fasted for 21 days. During this fast, we were able to watch her tumors disappear to the point there was no detectable tumor left. We couldn't feel anything. After 3 weeks of fasting, 10 days of feeding, immediately sent her back to the medical school with some coaching. Because we said, look, they're not going to be like all happy, what we need you to do is to get a follow-up CT scan on the same piece of equipment they did. So if we don't objectify it, it's not going to be easy to publish this. And she said, okay, she wanted to help, she wanted to do that. So she went back up to the oncologist, and he examined her, and he looked at the chart. It had been a month, so he hadn't seen her, and then he looked at the picture, and he looked at her, and then he examined her again. And he looked at her, and he said, what happened? And she says, oh, I went to the criminal quacks, and I did the fasting, and the tumors all went away. And he said, that's really interesting. I'm going to have to give him a call. And then she said, okay, well, now I'd like to have a follow-up CT scan. And he got a little nervous, and he said, no, you don't need any more CT scans. And she goes, but I want to objectify the results. And he says, I'm objectifying the results. I've been in practice 25 years. You don't need any CT scans. We don't need any more objective data on you. You're fine. And she said, well, are you sure that there's not any cancer lurking just beneath? He said, okay, fine. Orders the CT scan. And then he tells her, look, you're still a little too low on the white count. Why don't we do just a little chemotherapy? And she said, well, can we wait and just see if the diet will help? Okay, you want to wait, no problem. Comes out at 3 months, her white count's normal. Okay? And then at 12 months, we sent her back again. And now she's gone, she started at 100, well, let's look here, I'll show you this. She starts at 81 kilograms, goes to 78 kilograms at the start of the fast. So she had done the pre-fasting preparation. She went to 68 kilograms, so lost 22 pounds during the fast, 21 days, 22 pounds, about right. And at 6-month follow-up, she was down to 63 kilograms. At 12 months, she was down to 59 kilograms. What was she doing?
She's following the
Following the program. Yeah, absolutely. She's following the program. I told her that if she didn't follow the program, it could be fatal because I'd track her down and kill her. So we get her down to 15, and then we send her back to the oncologist, and he is like really happy, and he tells her, look, you come back in a year, you're doing fine, whatever, you know. So, meanwhile, I wrote, you know, John McDougall, right? My hero guys here, welcome town. So I write to John. I called John on the phone. I said, hey, John, I've got this great case report on lymphoma where the cancers went away. He goes, yeah, but do you have any objective data? I said, yeah, I got follow-up CT scans. He goes, oh, how'd you do that? I said, yeah. So I said, well, I got it. He goes, well, then you're going to have to publish. I said, yeah, I'm going to send it to the British Medical Journal. He goes, no, you're not. He says, they'll never publish it. He said he submitted there twice before. They always reject it. They're assholes. They're not going to publish it. So I sent it to the British Medical Journal. And after a bit of back and forth, they eventually published it. This is a few months ago they published this paper. So I was able to call John back. I said, oh, John, guess what? They published the paper. He says, I don't believe it. He said, I don't understand. I said, I think maybe they like chiropractors. So this is the CT. You can see one of the masses here. Oops.
People are staying.
Hold on. Before, after. So anyway, I write to the oncologist at the medical school, and I say, dear Dr. So-and-so, I want to thank you so much for all the tremendous support you've been in encouraging your patient and referring your patient to us for therapeutic water-only fasting. And as I'm sure you expect, your patient's gone into full, yeah, I know, I don't like it either. I've gone into full remission. This dog knows when you're lying. And I said, and thanks, I mean, because of your tremendous support, now we have a paper that's been accepted for review at the British Medical Journal, and we'd like to invite you to sign on as co-author of the paper. It's been 2 years, I haven't heard from him. So, in any case, she's doing very well. We do have a 2-year follow-up on her now. She continues to do very well, yes.
What is this weight, 81 and 50?
Kilograms. So that'd be
Oh.
2.2, 170, so 181, 150, 176, and 130. So now at 60, she's 132 pounds, so she's doing good. So it's in kilograms. That's the measurements they use in these things, like everywhere in the world except us. How do you tell with kids if they've learned their, if a child has learned their decimal, what do you call it? Metrics. What do you know about that child? If you have a child in school today and they know their metrics backward and forward, what can you tell about that child?
European.
He's a drug dealer. You watch out for those kids that know their metrics. Okay. So,
They're what?
drug dealer. They're the only ones they measure in kilos. Okay, so enzymatic induction. The other mechanism of fasting, we talk about detox, enzymatic induction. How does fat get mobilized? If you have fat and you're going to burn it into energy, it requires enzymes, lipolysis, enzymatic driven to mobilize those fat stores. If you have glycogen and you want to mobilize your sugar stores, it requires glycolysis, enzymatically driven. What else do you need enzymes for? Detoxification. If you have PCB in your body or mercury or heavy metals stored up in your cells, in order to get them out, processed, eliminated mostly in the urine, that requires detoxifying enzyme systems. And just like an athlete induces enzyme systems every time they train to become a trained athlete, that's why they can run farther, faster, higher, better, because they've induced these glycogen mobilizing enzyme systems. And every time you fast, you induce glycogen and fat mobilizing enzyme systems. You get better and better at mobilizing fat. And as a consequence, that's why people get better and better at fasting, more and more efficient at mobilizing toxins, mobilizing fat stores. So the idea that you can induce detoxification enzyme systems, it doesn't just happen when you're fasting. Every time you fast and you induce that cascade of enzyme systems, it persists after fasting. You get better and better at detoxifying as people go on. That's why you'll see people with sometimes several fasts over time. The problems that didn't resolve maybe the first time can, because, and we'll be able to quantify this very shortly, because these are some of the things we'll be able to start to measure with some of these laboratory tests. BDNF is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. This correlates with Alzheimer's disease and dementia. If you take rats and you can manipulate them to increase their BDNF, they don't get Alzheimer's disease, they don't get dementia. There's even some evidence of reversal in rats anyway. So the point is, what can you do to a rat to increase its BDNF and dramatically reduce its Alzheimer's potential? Exercise. Put a wheel in the cage. And the rats that exercise have much higher BDNF and much lower Alzheimer's disease. What else can you do to a rat to increase its BDNF? Fasting. Fasting induces increased BDNF. It's interesting, many of the markers that we've identified now that go up with exercise also go up with fasting. We don't know exactly why yet, but there's a real strong correlation. The only things we know that dramatically increase BDNF are exercise, fasting. And the hope is that periodic fasting may help us maintain higher BDNF levels, and that may be associated with lower Alzheimer's rate. It certainly is in rats. Insulin is a hormone that drives sugar from your bloodstream into the cells. What would happen if your insulin wasn't there or didn't work well? What would happen to your blood sugar levels? Go up, we'd call it diabetes mellitus. That's what it is. Diabetes is not a deficiency of insulin. Type 2 diabetics have more, not less insulin. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work because of resistance to it working at the sites of the insulin receptors. And what causes insulin resistance is the diet that makes you fat. Now, being overweight isn't the only variable. Witness the fact that your blood sugar levels often go down before you've lost all the fat. But the diet that makes you fat. Now, to some degree, fat itself is insulin a problem. So the closer you get to optimum weight, the easier it is to get your blood sugar levels down. Okay. Insulin, if you have insulin resistance, what drug can you take to overcome insulin resistance? No, there isn't any. Insulin doesn't overcome insulin resistance. It just mechanically pushes a little bit more insulin across, and the oral medications don't reduce insulin resistance. They just manipulate things to try to get a little bit more across the membrane. They become less and less effective over time. Fasting and exercise both reduce insulin resistance. The gut is a tunnel that goes from your mouth to a hole at the other end, and digestion is essentially shoving stuff in one hole and pushing it out the other hole. It does not enter your body when you swallow. You swallow something, it's not in your body. It's going through your body. It doesn't enter your body unless it gets through the fine mucosal membrane making up your digestive system, represented here by a screen like a fly. If you open the window, the flies can't get in unless the screen becomes damaged. And then the flies could get in. In your gut, nothing gets through that membrane except amino acids and glucose, no bacteria, no proteins, unless it's damaged. What could damage your fine mucosal membrane of your gut? Free radicals. Where do you get free radicals from? Smoking, drinking alcohol, eating fatty foods, the high-fat foods, animal foods, fried foods, cookies, crackers, all the things that have oil cooked at high temperature. Bathe your body in free radicals, damage the gut, cause gut leakage, and get that whole cascading disease process that goes along with it. Smoker's face, we talked about that already. I guess that's why people smoke. They're hoping to get this. Sympathetic tone, the autonomic nervous system, the automatic nervous system, autonomic or automatic, controls all the things you don't have to think about. If you went running and your heart didn't beat up, you would die. Do you have to remember to tell your heart to go faster, or does it do it automatically? What controls that? The autonomic nervous system. It has two branches, sympathetic, parasympathetic. They work in concert with each other. If one tone gets too high, like hypersympathetic, you might have a symptom like constipation. If the parasympathetic tone gets too high, you might have diarrhea. And keeping that system in balance is what all those natural therapies we talked about before primarily do. Whether it's meditation, yoga, biofeedback, acupuncture, chiropractic manipulation, all these things we do that help people feel better as naturopaths help balance the autonomic nervous system. Some work better than others, but the point is that's the main mechanism by which many of them work. What is the most powerful way of rebooting the autonomic nervous system? It works much like taking a corrupted hard drive in a computer, turning it off and turning it on, rebooting it. Fasting. It's bizarre. It's like rebooting the hard drive. You don't exactly know how it got rid of all that corruption that was in the hard drive when you turn it off and reboot it, but it does. And the same thing can happen in fasting. Psychospiritual. Isn't it interesting that every major religion has a tradition of fasting? The Jains, the Jews, the Hindus, the Buddhists, they all disagree on all kinds of stuff. They'll kill each other over kind of the disagreements. But one thing they all agree on, is fasting has a role both for psychological and spiritual and physical benefit. It's a common ground. And that's why, we try to keep a neutral environment. Okay. Immune system enhancement. The immune system is not suppressed during fasting. People think it would be. Oh, going to fast, you're going to get sick and die and whatever. But every objective measure of immune system function, helper killer T cell activity, neutrophil phagocytosis, all these measures, and the ones we're about to start measuring, we're going to find are likely to be enhanced during fasting. And taste and adaptation. Remember my union guy that couldn't take the tasteless swill and then did a fast and then he could choke down the food? Taste and adaptation. We're doing a study, one of our first clinical trials actually, starting in February 1st. We have a new doctor coming. Her name is Serena. She's a medical doctor from Italy. She's actually the chain of custody doctor for Luigi Fontana, so he doesn't want to take any chance that we don't get exactly the right blood samples. We don't play any games. So, but she's coming. She's a researcher. She's going to be literally, when Tam draws the blood, she'll take the blood and transport it immediately to Bach Institute, where it'll be analyzed and broken down, so there couldn't be any confusion. So the point is, we're going to take that. What was I talking about? Oh, taste and rotation. Yeah. We're going to do a study on taste and rotation. We can actually now quantify your microsensitivity to salt, oil, and sugar. In other words, we can give you a little solution blinded, where we can detect your minimum threshold. So the lowest level you can detect, where you can tell it tastes salty or you don't taste anything. And we blind it with distilled water. We do a little bit of testing. And then we do it after fasting, and we do it after feeding. We already know what's going to happen. You come in, you can't taste anything, and then you can taste the salt and the chard because you get more sensitive. We're going to quantify that, though, in a way that neither you nor the researcher knows which the sample is, get it all blinded out. And we're going to be able to show that fasting actually changes your palate. We know it does because you can experience it after fasting. We're going to prove it. Nobody's ever proven that before. That's going to make fasting way more acceptable to a lot of researchers, because now they can't accept the idea that you're detoxing and doing all this, but they can accept the idea that it can help people make adjustments to diet. Everybody's struggling. How do you get people willing to eat good food? Okay, even our colleagues like John McDougall and others, they have to put salt and sugar and do all kinds of things trying to get people to choke down the food. Because without fasting, people coming in, and some of you are experiencing that right now, you can't decide, you cannot imagine how anybody could eat this awful crap. Because it has no flavor, it doesn't taste. But after fasting, it starts to change. No, did we change the food after fasting, or did we change your palate? We're going to prove that. That's going to be step number one. We've got some other things that we're looking at too. Microbiota. One of the important parts of the immune system is the bacteria that live in your gut. Think about it. 70% of your immune cells live in your digestive system, as you would expect they would. Because everything that comes in from the outside, most of it comes in through the diet. It has to protect you against the viruses, the bacteria. So a huge part of your immune system is the microbes that live in your gut. Now the microbes are living organisms, and they give off what? Poo. Now some microbes give off poo that acts like fertilizer for you, and some of it is toxic, nasty waste. That's the difference between a bacteria that's infectious and causes disease and breaks your cells down, and one that's helpful and supportive, gives you vitamin K and other stuff, okay? So the different bacteria have different effects. Some are nasty infections that kill you, and some are very nice. Like cholera is not a nice one, okay? But the normal flora in your gut that's responsible for making your vitamins is good. So you want good, nice flora in your gut, not nasty flora in your gut. What affects that, for example, if you take antibiotics, you wipe everything out. And then depending on your diet, you may grow good things or bad things. Trying to get the good things back, people use probiotics, they use stuff. What's the most powerful way we're going to prove is to do nothing. Water-only fasting, reboot the entire system, then put the right food in, the right prebiotics in the form of fruits and vegetables, then you grow normal bacteria. We're going to be able to show, and the buck has the ability to break down the gut flora, break out all the different types of flora. It's really sophisticated stuff. They're going to be able to do that. We're going to be able to look at it before, after fasting. We're going to look at it without fasting, with diet. That's going to be another study. In fact, we've just got the, if they don't approve it as part of what we've already done, we found a lab, Dr. Myers found a lab that's willing to, at cost, provide, they're rather expensive analyses, but we can run 20 subjects through 3 tests for like $30,000. So we'll be able to do that. We've got some money from the TrueNorth Foundation to fund that. We're going to be able to do that. Once we do that, that also can be a game changer. Because right now everybody's fussing around trying to figure out how do you get the gut back. Fasting may turn out to be really effective. We'll know more shortly. So, to summarize my effects, I was supposed to only go an hour, but fasting, oh, I forgot about insulin growth factor 1. That's another objective marker. The higher the IGF-1, the higher the aging factors. It's one of those markers that have been identified. And fasting, like exercise, reduces insulin growth factor 1 as well as glucose. Fasting decreases blood pressure, heart rate, insulin, inflammation, total microbial load. Fasting increases leptin. Leptin is one of those satiety hormones. You think after fasting you'd be ravenous and you'd want to eat the whole thing, right? You don't. How many people coming off fast notice like, oh, they think they're going to be so hungry, but they're relatively easily satisfied because now their satiation mechanisms are back to normal instead of being artificially stimulated with all those insulin levels and sugars bouncing around, eating all that highly processed, greasy, fatty, slimy, dead, decaying flesh processed crap. Fasting increases insulin sensitivity, so the insulin works better. That's why diabetics find they oftentimes get significant improvement. Increases cellular stress, adaptation, resistance. We talked about that with cancer cells. Autophagy, the ability of white cells to do their job. Gut microbiota stimulates B-cell immunity. It reverses all major abnormalities associated with metabolic syndrome. We can actually treat more effectively doing this the 80% of people dying prematurely than anything else out there. Now, again, we have to prove that, but now we actually have just leaped ahead in our ability to do that. How did we do that? First of all, we've been able to get a team together, and we've been able to get affiliated with the people kind of at the top of the pecking order. Fontana's publishing in Nature and JAMA and Science, the biggest journals. And so what we offer is the ability to recruit patients that actually are willing to fast, and then actually to fast them without him having to use his funding. So he can reserve all of his status and funding. We don't have to compete with them, and yet we're able to be a valuable team member. And so we've been able to convince them of that, and that's why we'll be able to make this. If we had to go out and purchase lab equipment, spend $10 million to get spectrophotometers, I mean, it would be overwhelming. That's what we thought we were going to do. Now we don't have to do it. We can actually tap right in to already existing. It's already sitting right there, and do it. And fortunately, the people that have been here, they've done the site review where we've gotten through all of the nonsense that it takes to get into position to do that. Okay, Pleasure Trap is our book. Health Promoting Cookbook, the Bravo Cookbook, and now Kathy's fabulous new book, Straight Up Cooking. All three are vegan, SOS free. SOS stands for the International Symbol of Danger. It also stands for sugar, including refined carbohydrates, oil, and salt. If you want recipes simple enough that even I can make them, any one of those three cookbooks can give you some good ideas. So those are three really good. There's no more excuse about not having a lot of variety of interesting ideas. This food you can even make where some of your friends that don't want to be healthy might choke it down. So, yes.
What's the name of the third book?
Straight up.
Straight up foods. Yeah, it's all out front right there. They're all next to each other. The three vegan SOS free cookbooks. And there's going to be a fourth SOS free cookbook. When does it come out?
Ask Charles. He's trying to edit it, and he just sits
Charles,
there.
when is it coming out?
I'm trying to finish it in my room. But
Oh,
I
okay. So can we expect it next year, though?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, and we will have it available as well. That'll be number 4 on the SOS free
Thank you.
cookbook. So, and there's hopefully going to be a lot more. Because this whole idea of sugar, oil, and salt free, it's a little bit extreme because you have to actually, you cannot make foods taste good without sugar, oil, and salt unless you start with good foods.
Yeah.
And the less you process them, the less you manipulate them, the better off you have a chance to make foods taste good without having to use all this stuff. So it is an adjustment, but now we're at least collecting the tools. Now the other thing we're going to try to do is figure out how to support people. When they come here, they do fine. When they go home, sometimes I know some of you are going to find this shocking, but they run into little roadblocks and challenges. And so our new website, through the foundation, part of the mission of our nonprofit foundation is public education and research. Now, the public education includes the public and also our training program. We have an internship training program. You see a bunch of intern doctors here. We do about 30 doctors a year because we're thinking if we get enough doctors out there in the world trained that actually know this stuff, they can be helpful. So we're training doctors and we're training the public, and part of the way we're going to do that is through the fasting.org. Fasting.org. Currently, it goes to our current website. We have a new site we're about to launch. It'll launch in January. And it's a fasting compendium research site where it has all the research on fasting in one place with our commentary, and then also the information on diet and lifestyle, but more importantly, it's going to have channels of support. And we're going to be actually studying different ways of, scalable ways of supporting people, web-based, that will help people comply, both social things and, anyway, we've got a lot of ideas. We're working with some people from Cornell University, PhD students, others, on different techniques to help support improved compliance. Basically, we want you to stick to programs to make us look good. I mean, that's essentially what it comes down to. So we're trying to figure out the ways to make it happen. Now, we found one way, just moving here. It works great, you know, or moving next door, you know. But we're also going to try to figure out a way to make it happen. Now, part of that is to get more doctors out there, more facilities. We have 2 facilities that are opening. One is just opening in Ohio with Gracie Ewan. Dr. Ewan was here for 5 years. She has a small facility near Cleveland. And then we have another one, Dr. Frank Sabatino has opened up a small facility in Florida. And we've got other people that we're working on. So eventually there'll be a whole network of people trying to offer this type of approach.
Is that through TrueNorth?
Well, they're affiliates in the sense that what we're sharing is research. So,
No, it's a different.
no, it's a different issue. So these will be facilities that will be offering the same model of care, and we'll be affiliated in the sense we'll be cooperating on research. It's their facilities, we have nothing to do financially. The TrueNorth Health Center is affiliated with the TrueNorth Health Foundation. The TrueNorth Health Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit foundation. All proceeds from the sale of anything here, any net, goes to the TrueNorth Health Foundation. So when you buy stuff here, whatever, that it does not accrue to the doctors. No doctor here gets anything from ordering things or tests or you being here or not. They're getting paid for their time. The facilities, resources flow to the TrueNorth Health Foundation. The TrueNorth Health Foundation, you can help. You can help because you're here. You know, you're doing stuff. That supports the foundation. You can also do it through Amazon.com or eBay if you select us as your charity. And Amazon, they'll donate 0.5% of everything you ever buy without costing you anything, just by selecting us. And when you look us up on the list of charities, we're one word, TrueNorth. If you go on to Amazon Smile and look it up and select us once, smile.amazon.com, just do it once. What will happen is they'll remember that. They'll remember it. Every time you go into Amazon through Amazon Smile, they'll remember that, and it doesn't cost you anything. If you have any question, the concierges here can help you set it up, put the little link on your page so that you can do that. It really helps us. Also, eBay has a similar thing. We're also one of the charities on eBay. Also, if you do charitable trust, if you control charitable trust, we're a 501c3 nonprofit. You can donate to us, get the same tax deduction. You can do, some people have done charitable trust where they donate a product to the foundation. They continue to get the income from that product. They get the capital gains deduction up front. When they die, instead of it passing on to their estate, it will pass on to the nonprofit foundation. That's another thing we've had people do, which is great. Bequest, we don't want any of you to do that until we get our 50-year follow-up. But after that, you can certainly remember TrueNorth Health. And we've had some very generous patients that have helped us do that. So don't give it to the American Cancer Society or whatever you're doing right now. Do TrueNorth Health Foundation. That will take good, responsible care of those resources. Okay.
Dr. Goldhamer, how do you get on the foundation board? I see a lot of
Well,
faces.
the Founders Club was something that we did in the past. What had happened was about 10 years ago, after we lost all our money trying to build a place, but they took it away from us, we decided we were going to, well, Jennifer said maybe we should retire. I said I didn't want to retire. She said we lost all our money because we borrowed all this money to build this place. And then the government decided they wanted the piece of property that we put it on. So we made it so we couldn't go forward. We lost everything. It was terrible. I don't even want to talk about it. But, so I said to Jennifer, well, if I can raise the money, can we do a new place? And she said, well, if you can raise the money, good. Because she knew she couldn't get a loan. The banks wouldn't talk to us. So I called the consultant and I said, what if we went to our patients and borrowed the money from the patients? He said, well, you could do that. And he looked at our list size of our thing. He said, I think you could raise like about $200,000. I said, well, I need about $1.5 million to do a facility. And he goes, you have to have a much bigger facility to do that. And I said, well, let's try it. So we sent out a letter, and in the first week we raised $600,000, and within a couple months we'd raised over $1 million, and eventually raised $1.4 million. And that was enough to get this place renovated, do this whole thing. And then what the deal was is those people, of course we had no equity to offer them, we had no security. And we said, look, instead of interest, because we can't pay you interest, we'll give you weeks of stay at this future place once we get it up. And 68 people said, sure, no problem, and wrote checks ranging from $225,000 to $150,000. It was ridiculous. So we raised all this money, we got the place up. All those people have come in, gone out, used their stay, got their thing. They've all been paid off. We have, at 5 years, we paid off the notes. And now we don't have any debt, and we don't owe anybody anything, and it's great. So that was what the Founders Club was. And they were very generous, crazy people that were willing on a faith to take faith and take the leap, and it was great. So we're not in that business anymore. So that's how that whole thing came about. So we're always grateful to all our founders who were willing to step up when we really needed to do it. And otherwise, Jennifer wouldn't have let us do it. And so now it's good. Now we've done, for those of you who haven't been here or never been here, we now got the 4 houses adjacent, and we moved all of our offices into there, and that's why we were able to add these new patient rooms. We have 9 of the 17 units in the apartment building behind us. We're negotiating right now with the owner to get a master lease on that, and we're also trying to work on some space in the shopping center behind us. That's going to allow us to grow a little bit more, mostly get more space for staff, because we're bringing in some additional researchers and some additional staff. We want to expand or at least protect our internship program so we have space to put them. And I predict that once we start publishing some of this data, a couple things will change. Number one, fasting will become more acceptable because what we do actually works, and we're going to be able to prove it. And I think we're going to get a lot more attention, which is going to help us because it's going to allow us to recruit specifically for studies. We're going to need certain people. We're going to need people with lupus, or we're going to need people with certain conditions. So what we're trying to do is dramatically expand our exposure through our foundation's educational outreach website so that everybody interested in fasting is coming to that site. And therefore, we can get all those doctors that are familiar with this to help us recruit appropriate subjects so we can prove we're right and they're wrong. That's essentially what it comes down to.
It's freezing in here.
Oh, well, let's turn the heater on. I thought
They're asking, the 100 people that are watching you live want to know the name of the fasting center in Florida.
The Jade Resort.
Ocean Jade
Health
Retreat.
Yeah, Ocean Jade Health Retreat.
Lauderdale by the Sea.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Frank Sabatino, wonderful guy. Yes.
Does Parkinson's disease respond to fasting?
Yes, Parkinson's responds to fasting, but it doesn't respond to fasting well enough alone. We also resort to using Marty Hines' published work. If you look up Marty Hines online, he's published about 100 plus articles on the use of amino acid loading and L-DOPA in the treatment of Parkinson's disease. It works very well. It's a little bit more complicated than using Cinemet. Cinemet is a problem because it has cardopa, which irreversibly binds B6, and so over the long run you develop B6 deficiency and creates a mess. With this approach, it's a more nutritional medicine approach. It doesn't use any pharmaceutical drugs. It uses some nutritional supplements and amino acids. And it can manage Parkinson's effectively. We have 2 doctors on our staff that have been trained by Marty Hines, Chilla Veres and Peter Sultana, and both of them can talk to you in detail about the approach and how that all works. So the combination of diet, fasting, exercise, and then this nutritional medicine approach is a much more successful strategy for managing Parkinson's than is the conventional take the drugs and then pay the price down the road.
Well, I've been coming to TrueNorth since you were a rustic facility in Pengrove, and now you're on the verge of becoming an international power in the medical or in the health field to the detriment of some of the most powerful industries in the United States. And I kind of worry for you that they're going to come after you big time.
Well, we'll see. I don't think so. I think that the stuff that we're doing now, and part of the reason we're affiliating with the people we're doing, they'll blame them. They won't blame us. We're just the blue-collar guys carrying out the study. It's not going to, we won't be the principal authors on any of this stuff. We may even be on some of this stuff. So I don't think we have to worry too much. We're such small potatoes right now, and there's so many other things they can worry about. I don't think that we're going to be so much of a target. And also, I think it depends on what conditions we go after and stuff. If you pick the stuff they're not making big bucks on, I don't think it'll be too bad.
Is there, does fasting, does that have any effect on epilepsy?
Yeah, you know, the original treatment for epilepsy was fasting because of the effect that it has in ameliorating the symptoms. But you're not curing, I don't believe, epilepsy with fasting. It's a management strategy, and it's the ketosis that seems associated with it. I haven't been particularly satisfied with our clinical outcomes in managing epilepsy in the sense that, oh, if you just fast and everything's fine. I think fasting and diet may be a part of the overall management of people with epilepsy, but it's more complicated. And I'm not sure we really have a handle exactly how much of it's for scar tissue, how much of it's inflammatory. Some people do seem to do really well, but we can't tell who those are. And so I don't know that I would want to. And it's also difficult to manage, just as you know. Epileptic patients can be rather disturbing to people around them, and people get freaked out. And so, and particularly because of the high-risk perception of fasting, we tend not to want to have people that are having major seizure disorders as a routine thing, even though it might be a perfectly appropriate candidate. It's difficult patients to manage. So.
I mean, even if medication perfectly controls their seizures?
Well, the problem is you can't fast on the medications because the medications have very tight dose-response ratios, so you'd have to have experience knowing how to modify the medications in order to do it. It's not something I know how to do yet.
So you can't fast?
Not while you're on the
fasting with...
You can, yeah, unless you want to wean the meds, and which we've done, and you know, and then usually during fasting you're okay because you're in ketosis. You don't tend to have seizures as much in the ketogenic state. But then when you feed again, you have to either go back on medication or take the chance that we have activated seizure activity. So it's a pain in the butt actually. It's really unfortunate. We may know more later, but right now it's hard to even do the research.
What about intermittent fasting?
Yes, you can absolutely do intermittent fasting in almost any condition, because all intermittent fasting does is it limits overeating. You're getting rid of the dietary excess. It's a tool that can be helpful, yes.
You said today something I haven't heard about, that not drinking alcohol can actually lower your blood pressure. Were you referring to a casual drinker or alcoholic?
No, alcohol is a problem for blood pressure. So the more you drink, the worse it is. So people should not drink.
I agree.
Yeah, and it is a major risk factor for blood pressure.
Thank you.
So casual drinker, mild. It's like saying, is chocolate a problem for obesity? How fat do you want to be? I say just melt it down and rub it on your hip and then wash it off, and you won't have to carry it around all week. Yes.
Alan, are you familiar with the book that came out called The Dorito Effect?
No.
It's a great.
Yeah, I'll have to read it.
Say, in addition to salt, oil, and sugar, you can have chemicals that will treat for taste.
Well, I wouldn't have any doubt that there may be issues, and there. I'm not familiar with it, but I'll be happy to take a look at it. Yeah, good book. Okay. Yeah.
Your staff doctors don't agree for fasting for the polycythemia vera condition.
Well, when you say they don't agree, they don't agree that it's going to resolve it, or it's not going to be?
They suggest it's not advisable.
Okay.
Polycythemia vera.
I'll have to talk to whichever doctor is. We've certainly treated patients before. I don't know that it's going to be an effective treatment for resolving a genetically mediated condition, but I don't know that it's necessarily an absolute contraindication to fasting unless there's a medication use. If there's an anticoagulant or something, I'm not sure. Why don't we talk about that? I'm not sure why it is about your specific medical history. It's not a general preclusion, but there may be something specifically with you, but we can get into that.
Well, when are you going to start looking for subjects for the research?
We'll probably begin with the people that are already coming in anyway to do like the taste notification because it's not disease specific.
That sounds so fun though. Can we all get it?
And so, so we're going to look for volunteers of the people that will be coming in next. We'll have 1,000 people come through anyway next year. Of those people, we should have enough to be able to do, the 100 subjects or whatever we need to do this particular study. What's going to happen, just so you understand, we are transforming from what we are today to a human subjects laboratory. So we're going to have two kinds of primary patients here. One are return people that have been here before, that we do ongoing support with, and two people that are entering one type of trial or another. Now some of them may just be long-term compliance trials where we're just tracking people's success, whatever their thing is. Some of them are going to be entering into a taste notification study, or they may be doing a hypertensive study or a lupus study. And so what's going to happen is we're going to be admitting more and more people entering into trials. So unless you're entering into a trial or you're a return patient, it's going to get harder to access space unless we're able to succeed in expanding a little bit to accommodate that. Because my primary interest right now is trying to find people that are interested in two things. Number one, they're willing to submit to evaluating the effectiveness of what we're doing, and they're going to make a good faith effort long term to sustain diet and lifestyle compliance. And we're going to try to figure out everything we can do to support them in being successful in that. Now, we've done a pretty good job here. We can do this safely and effectively. We haven't done much with what do you do when people go out there. So we're looking to create situations to help make that happen more effectively, and then quantifying that as well, because that's obviously the limiting factor. Even if we can get you well, everybody can't move to TrueNorth Health Center. We have to figure out a way for people to live out there, and that's a challenge. But so anyway, that's going to be my primary interest and focus, and so you can bet that the priority is going to be people interested in helping us do that. And for most people, they'll be positive, because what's going to happen, for example, we have study grants that will pay for like the laboratory testing and all that stuff. So you might come in, and it may not necessarily cover your care, but it'll cover all the testing associated with the care. And so you're going to get a lot more focused attention without necessarily increased economic cost. But it also means there's a little bit more, you answer some questionnaires, you fill in. Yes, not everybody wants to do that, which is fine. But the people that are willing to do that, that's going to be a huge benefit and value to us. So we're going to be recruiting people specifically willing to fill out questionnaires, do follow-up, do long-term outcome data. We do that anyway with patients, but we're going to formalize it. Because the important thing is to find out, number one, is what we're doing working, and can we do it better? We want to be able to know how long should they go, when are they done, when should they do it again. We want objective measures of that, rather than just our clinical impressions. And then we need to be able to prove to the skeptics of the world that this is a better approach than the alternative approach. And then we need to broadcast that to the public. So that's why we have all these different components to the foundation. Public education, we're reaching out to the researchers, to clinicians, to the public. We're doing primary research ourselves, and we're going to become a laboratory. Other people like Fontana will come to us and say, I have a grant, I have a research proposal, we want you to recruit the patients, conduct the study, and get us blood samples. And we'll analyze it, and then we'll have affiliate publications with them. So we won't have to be driving the boat on every study, every grant, everything. But the impact of our core team can be geometrically increased. We can be involved in dozens of studies, because these samples, like, you only need a micromillimeter of blood to be able to run some of these analyses. So one blood vial could go to 50 researchers.
Wow.
If people are willing. And now that we have the ability to efficiently do that, we can do it so much more cost effectively. Like, for example, a person for the buck in a metabolic ward, it costs them $2,500 a night per person to have a subject in a ward. $2,500 a night. Plus they have to bribe the subject, and plus they sneak out and cheat and don't want to. I mean, who's going to fast for 20 days? You know, you can't get people to do that. We can, and it costs them nothing, because our foundation helps support getting the people here, doing the thing, running the. Because we've got something in place, and we can do it for pennies on the dollar. Because for $150 a night or $180 a night, whatever it is, we can run everything we need to run here. They couldn't even closely approximate that. They couldn't even imagine it. Can you imagine, let's say you were a scientist and you wanted to set up a study. You wanted to look at 20 people water fasting for 20 days, 10-day follow-up. So what would you do? Well, I guess you could like book a hotel, and you could hire 50 people or whatever. I mean, you just think about what the cost would be. It's just tremendous. And trying to do it in a controlled setting, and it's not practical. That's why it's never been done. Now we represent, to the research community, we represent a really unique situation. We're willing to do all that for them. All we want to do is play with their toys. We want access to the lab equipment. We want access to publication thing. So, now the game changes. And because we're a 501c3 and we're stable, most nonprofits are so broke, they can't actually move. They spend all their money trying to raise money. Okay? Well, we have a business that has been turned over so that the net of that business supports the foundation. The reason why it's not completely in the foundation, and with a nonprofit, you can't have all of the activity of the nonprofit being a business like this. Eventually, the foundation will be big enough. This will just be a small part of what it does. Right now, it is what we do. So we have two separate entities, but it works out just fine.
The Buck Institute, is that Dr. Almond? Is he affiliated with that or no? I'm talking about cognitive decline, and you haven't mentioned too much about that now.
I don't know.
You don't know.
All I know is the guy that we're working with. I don't know who else. I haven't been up there yet. I've been invited to come up to do a presentation to all the different departments, but haven't done that yet. So we'll be going up there in January or February.
Yeah, that's just down the road.
Yeah, it's right in Nevada. It just happens to be right there.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You mentioned, this gentleman mentioned after just a couple of days of fasting, he was able to give up smoking, right?
Oh wait, yes, it is. That's what they're working on right now. With Alzheimer's, they're looking at dietary intervention in Alzheimer's and dementia. That's exactly what they're doing. In fact, one of the people involved in that has already come up. So I didn't know. I can't say absolutely certainly that's the gentleman's name, but that's the Buck is where they're doing the research that you're referring to. Now what we're going to try to do is add to that the fasting component. They're already looking at the dietary component, and they feel like they're seeing some positive objective evidence from getting people to eat well. But yeah, that is exactly one of the principal things. I'm sorry.
That's the number 3 killer apparently in the U.S. right now.
So this gentleman was able to lose his desire to smoke after 2 days. What about caffeine? Like if I'm a
Yeah.
caffeine addict.
Caffeine will take 3 or 4 days of hell.
Okay, because I'm on my 5th day of,
You still have headache?
no, the headache's almost gone.
Okay, well eventually it goes away if you survive. Caffeine is really tough. It's a harder that's why I always tell people quit a couple days before you come in because I don't want to look at you.
Yeah, no, I actually stopped, well, yeah, I had a deep, but
Yeah.
I quit the caffeine.
It is a really, people don't understand this is a highly addictive nervous system. So we give it to our kids, we put it in their chocolate, their cola. It's just disgusting. I mean, you don't give them cocaine, why are we giving them caffeine? They used to put cocaine in Coca-Cola. There's a better drug, it's called caffeine. It's nasty. Yeah, stop it. Yes.
Do you do the every other day fasting program here?
No.
Okay.
No. What we do is we'll recommend narrowing the feeding window. Every other day fasting. What I recommend is eat healthy every single day. If you want to reduce vegetables only, so about 600 calories. Now remember, 600 calories of raw fruit and vegetables is like 4 pounds of salad and 2 pounds of fruit. It's a lot of food. It's a full-time job.
Yeah.
Okay. So excuse me, I said that wrong. It's 3 pounds of salad and a pound of fruit. So 4 pounds of fruit, 600 calories. So the point is, 600 calories on days you can take it relatively easy. Healthy food the other day, narrow the feeding window. What ends up happening is you start losing the weight. And that, like Dr. Morano talked about, it's a great tool without huge sacrifice. But I don't recommend not eating at all. Water-only fasting I recommend. The thing with water fasting is it takes more than a day to get into some of this detox mode. So if you're going to do it the right amount of time, and don't do it when you're active and screwing around.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm curious, how many total people come here each year?
1,000 admissions right now, but it's going to increase because we're getting more capacity. You know, we're trying to if I can work out this deal on this other thing, we should have another dozen bed capacity. So it'll be another 200 admissions or something.
Are you gonna have a bigger a place to meet?
Yeah, this we have a way to expand this out.
Oh, great.
Yeah, this opens up, and then there's that dining area. There's some room back there.
Can we build on top? No?
No, we already have on top. We're already up.
Well, I hear you have a pretty big house. Maybe some of us could stay with you.
We don't normally have this many people. Remember, we're a fasting facility. Half our people are fasting all the time, so we don't normally have this many people eating. And this is the only time of year where we're really. Most of the time, you come here and you'll think it's not that busy. It's just not that busy because everybody's in the rooms. They're all, So, yeah, we don't do this any other time of the year where we have,
So if you're healthy and you're eating the diet, how long you should or how often you should fast?
Well, it depends on how healthy you are and how well you eat the diet. But I mean, most of our staff take once a year and we take a fast. And if you don't get any problems during the fast, you're probably okay. So I mean, I just did it. I hate fasting, but I do it every year. And I used to fast in the house, but my wife, Dr. Morano, was so strict, she wouldn't let me on my computer and stuff. And so this year I thought, well, I'll go to the center and fast. And then she said, oh, that's good, dear. Yeah, I'm coming with. So, but anyway, I've been fortunate. I fast since I've never, first of all, I got started when I was 16. So I've never smoked or had a drink or had a coffee or done, used a drug. I didn't have nothing like that. So nothing happens when I fast.
So maybe 5 days or 10 days is good enough?
Yeah, usually we figure you fast for 5 to 10 days, depending on how you're doing. If you're stable, you're probably okay. If you're not, though, you get to keep going until you clear. And you do however much you need to get the job done. So.
Can you just elaborate what you just said? If you have no symptoms during a fast, or
well, if by the time you fasted for a week, you're not generating any symptoms. If you have no symptoms going in, and you have no symptoms that generate by the time you fast for it, usually you don't get into any. Mostly these acute crises show up pretty quickly. You start, you get the low back, and then you get the nausea, and then that goes away. And you just wait till all that clears. But if you just go through it and you're fine, which is what happens to people when they've been living healthily, there usually isn't much happens at fasting. If you look at all the people like on the staff that fast, they're not having terrible headaches and this and that. It just doesn't happen. They go on, they're bored, they have to get a little weak, and that's it.
So fatigue is okay. That's not
if it's profound fatigue, you wonder what's going on. But no, well, yeah, you always, of course, you're going to be. It depends on the person, their age, the metabolic rate. There's a lot of.
Your wife doesn't want you on the computer? She doesn't want you doing anything?
She's so strict. She says, hey, if your computer, you're going to work, you know. She says fasting is resting, and you have to rest. And she's, yes, dear, yes, dear. I always said, my father, who was married for 68 years, so you ought to know the success to a successful marriage. And he says the secret to successful marriage is knowing the math of marriage. And the math of marriage is very simple. Women are right 90% of the time on average. And men are right not so much. So all the man has to know is he always agrees with the wife, and he'll be right at least 90% of the time. And if you get 90% right, you get an A. I happen to marry a 95%er. So, men we have to learn to just stop pretending like we're going to get something right at a higher percentage. Just you say yes, dear, but you can't just say yes, dear. You got to say it like you mean it. So you got to practice, like every day, practicing. And then if you get it down really good, then you'll have a successful marriage. Now, my wife has renewed my contract for 32 years in a row. So that's got to be a record, And this year, I'm going to ask for a 2-year extension. After 32 years, I think I've earned a 2-year extension. Okay, we're done.
Hey everybody, the name of the fasting center is Gracie Ewen, GRACIEYUEN in Ohio. Thanks so much for watching. Stay tuned. We've got another 10 days here, and I will broadcast as often as I can.